thought no one would stop them. A rich man's son, a helpless woman, a terrified puppy on the sidewalk. One kick was supposed to end it, but they didn't see the man watching from across the street. A Navy SEAL, a
Stay on the
war
ground.
dog,
Give me your hands.
and a line that should never have been crossed. This isn't just
All
a
clear.
story about violence.
Hands up.
It's about the moment power meets courage and learns it picked the wrong target. Stay with us to the end, because what happens next changes every life involved. Subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of justice, courage, and a hope that prove good still exists in this world. The July afternoon pressed down on San Diego like a wet hand, the air thick with salt, heat, and the metallic hum of traffic drifting in from the marina. Lynn Pham had learned long ago that heat was not something to complain about. It was something to endure. Sweat traced slow lines down her neck beneath the orange reflective vest as she leaned into her cart, gloved hands sorting damp trash bags that smelled of beer, sunscreen, and forgotten lunches. She was 27, small-framed, with narrow shoulders shaped more by survival than comfort, and dark hair pulled into a low ponytail that never stayed neat for long. Her face carried a quiet seriousness, almond-shaped eyes that noticed everything, lips that rarely curved into a smile in public spaces. Lynn worked sanitation because it paid on time, because it did not ask questions about her past, and because invisibility, in her experience, was often safer than being seen. The Marina District glittered around her in expensive indifference. White yachts rocked gently against their slips, their polished hulls reflecting the sun like blades. Cafes spilled laughter onto the sidewalks. People walked past Lynn without meeting her eyes, as if she were part of the pavement itself. She was used to that. What she was not used to was the sound she heard then, a thin, broken whimper that did not belong to the city. She stopped pushing her cart. Near a public trash station by the alley entrance, something moved. Lynn stepped closer and saw a puppy tied to the metal pole with a short, fraying cord. It was a Belgian Malinois, no more than 4 months old, its oversized ears half upright, half folded, as if it had not yet decided what kind of creature it would become. The dog's coat was a dusty fawn color, with a dark mask around the eyes, ribs faintly visible beneath the fur. Its paws were too large for its body, splayed awkwardly on the hot concrete. When it saw Lynn, it shrank back, tail tucked, the whimper rising again, a sound born not of aggression, but of hunger and fear. Lynn's chest tightened. She crouched slowly, careful not to startle it, murmuring soft sounds under her breath, the way she had learned to do with frightened animals as a child bouncing between foster homes. She reached into her pocket for the half bottle of water she had saved for later. The puppy sniffed the air, trembling, eyes locked on her hands. She never heard the door open behind her. The laughter came first, loud, careless, amplified by alcohol and entitlement. 3 young men spilled out of the private club that faced the marina, their clothes crisp and expensive in ways that screamed money without effort. The leader walked in front, tall and broad-shouldered, blonde hair styled carefully even in the heat, skin flushed pink from drink and sun. His name was Dylan Hawthorne, though Lynn would not know it yet. He moved like someone who had never been forced to step aside for anyone, his posture loose but dominant, chin lifted as if the world existed slightly below him. The second man, thinner, dark-haired, with sharp features and restless eyes, snorted with laughter as he nudged the third, a stocky, red-faced boy already swaying on his feet. They noticed Lynn at the same time they noticed the puppy. "Well, look at that," Dylan said, his voice smooth and lazy, carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Garbage Girl found herself a pet. The words hit Lynn harder than the heat. She stood, placing her body instinctively between the men and the puppy. Her heart began to race, not with fear yet, but with a familiar alertness. She had learned to read danger early in life. These men did not see her. They saw something to push against, something to test. One of them kicked the trash bag near her cart, sending foul water spilling across the pavement. It splashed up Lynn's boots and soaked the hem of her pants. Laughter exploded again. "Careful," the thin one said, grinning. "She might report us." Dylan's gaze dropped to the puppy, narrowing slightly. "What's that noise?" he asked, irritation creeping into his tone. "Shut it up." He stepped forward and nudged the puppy with the toe of his boat shoe, not hard, not yet, but enough to make it yelp and scramble back against the pole. Something snapped inside Lynn. It was not courage, it was reflex. The same reflex that had once made her stand between a drunk foster father and a younger child. The same reflex that had taught her pain was temporary, but regret could last forever. "Please," she said, her voice shaking despite her effort to steady it. "Leave it alone. It's just a dog." Dylan laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Don't tell me what to do." When he drew his leg back again, Lynn did not think. She lunged forward, wrapping her arms around the puppy and turning her body sideways to shield it. The kick landed against her ribs with a dull, brutal force that knocked the breath from her lungs. Pain flared white-hot through her side, radiating into her back. She gasped, collapsing to one knee but refusing to let go. The puppy disappeared against her chest, shaking violently. "Jesus, Dylan," one of the men said, half laughing, half nervous. "You didn't have to—" "She threw herself at me," Dylan snapped, "trying to scam me." He kicked again, catching her shoulder this time. Lynn curled tighter, teeth sinking into her lower lip, until she tasted blood. She could hear her own heartbeat roaring in her ears. She knew, with terrifying clarity, that if she let go of the dog, they would hurt it just to prove they could. That was when the shadow fell over them. Ethan Cross had been walking along the sidewalk on the opposite side of the street, the leash wrapped loosely around his left hand. He moved with a controlled, economical stride that came from years of training, not habit. At 33, he stood just over 6 feet tall, broad through the shoulders and chest, his frame packed with dense muscle earned through function rather than vanity. His skin was weathered a deep tan, creased faintly at the corners of his eyes and mouth, as if the sun and stress had shaped him together. His hair was dark brown, cut short in a regulation style that had long outlasted regulation, and his jaw was sharp, shadowed with stubble. A thin scar cut through his right eyebrow, pale against darker skin, a souvenir from a life that did not allow for softness. Ethan wore civilian clothes, gray t-shirt, dark jeans, but nothing about him read civilian. His posture was straight without being rigid, head turning slightly as he walked, eyes constantly scanning. Years as a Navy SEAL had trained him to notice details others filtered out: the pitch of laughter, the sudden spike of violence, the way one man's leg drew back with intent. He had learned discipline through loss, friends buried, missions that went wrong, choices that left marks deeper than scars. It had carved him into someone quiet, controlled, slow to anger and devastating when it arrived. Beside him walked Rex. Rex was a Belgian Malinois, 5 years old, lean and powerful, his coat darker than the puppy's, muscles shifting smoothly beneath skin as he moved. His ears stood tall and alert, eyes a focused amber that tracked movement with predator precision. Rex had been trained as a K-9 for special operations. Obedience under gunfire, target pursuit, threat identification. He was not aggressive without command, but he was always ready. The leash was a formality. The bond between dog and handler ran deeper than that. Ethan saw the kick land. He heard the change in pitch of the woman's breath. He felt Rex tense beside him, sensing his handler's shift in focus. Ethan crossed the street without breaking into a run. He stopped a few feet from the group, positioning himself at an angle that blocked Dylan's line of movement. His voice, when he spoke, was low and calm, carrying without effort. "Stop." The word cut through the scene like a blade. Dylan turned, irritation flashing across his face as his eyes traveled up Ethan's frame. He scoffed. "Mind your own business." Ethan's gaze dropped briefly to Lynn, curled protectively around the puppy, then returned to Dylan. There was no rage in his expression, only a cold, assessing focus that made the air feel suddenly heavier. Rex stood at his side, still as stone, eyes locked on Dylan's hands. "You're done," Ethan said. Dylan laughed, louder this time, puffing out his chest. "Do you know who I am?" he demanded. "My father owns half this city. People disappear when he wants them to." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Not fear, not surprise, recognition. He had heard versions of that sentence in war zones and boardrooms alike. Power spoken out loud was usually the weakest kind. He took one step forward, not threatening, not hurried, just enough to make Dylan lean back without realizing it. "Get away from her," Ethan said. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Lynn lay on the ground, shaking, pain pulsing through her ribs, the puppy's heart hammering against her own. She looked up at the man who had intervened, taking in the squared shoulders, the steady eyes, the dog that stood like a living weapon at his side. She did not know who he was, only that something about him felt immovable. Dylan opened his mouth to speak again. And that was where the afternoon changed. The ambulance doors slammed shut with a hollow metallic echo, sealing Lynn Pham inside a narrow, fluorescent-lit box that smelled of antiseptic and hot plastic. The siren's wail fading into a dull, distant howl as the vehicle merged into traffic. She lay on the gurney with her hands folded protectively over her ribs, fingers trembling despite her effort to keep them still, every breath sending a sharp reminder through her side where the kick had landed. Her face was pale beneath her tan, lips pressed tight, eyes fixed on the ceiling, as if counting the panels might keep her anchored to the present. The puppy, still nameless, still shaking, had been placed in a cardboard carrier at her feet, its dark eyes tracking her with quiet panic, the soft whine it made each time the ambulance hit a bump, cutting deeper than her own pain. A woman leaned over her, introducing herself as Nurse Carla Moreno, a compact, broad-shouldered woman in her early 40s with olive skin, dark hair pulled into a severe bun, and eyes that missed very little. Carla's movements were brisk but careful, the practiced efficiency of someone who had worked emergency rooms long enough to know when kindness mattered more than speed. "You're going to be okay," she said, her voice low and steady as she adjusted the monitor clipped to Lynn's finger. "Try to breathe shallow for now." Lynn nodded, swallowing hard, the words sticking in her throat. She had heard promises like that before. Some had been true, many had not. The emergency department of Harborview Medical Center was chaos contained by habit. Stretchers lined the corridors, monitors beeped in overlapping rhythms, and the air carried the sharp scent of disinfectant mixed with old coffee. Lynn was transferred to a curtained bay, her vest cut away to expose a blooming bruise already spreading like ink beneath her skin. As Carla palpated her ribs, Lynn hissed softly, gripping the edge of the mattress. The puppy's carrier was set on a chair beside her, the small body inside finally quiet, exhausted by fear. When the first police officer arrived, Lynn straightened instinctively, pain flaring as she tried to sit up. He was a tall man with thinning blonde hair and a soft belly straining against his uniform shirt, his badge catching the fluorescent light as he flipped open a small notebook. His name tag read, Officer Grant. His partner followed a moment later. Officer Rivas, shorter, darker skinned, with a narrow face and tired eyes that carried a permanent squint, as if he were always bracing for bad news. Rivas leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, posture relaxed to the point of indifference. Officer Grant cleared his throat. "Miss Pham, is it?" He did not look at her as he spoke, his gaze drifting instead to the chart at the foot of the bed. "We got a call about a disturbance near the marina. Vehicle involved. We just need to get your statement." Lynn nodded, drawing in a careful breath. She described the puppy, the men, the kicks, the laughter. Her voice wavered at first, then steadied as she continued, a familiar determination settling in. She named the club they had come from, the red sports car, the way the driver had smelled of alcohol even from a few feet away. She did not exaggerate. She did not minimize. She told the truth as cleanly as she could. Grant's pen slowed. Rivas shifted his weight, exchanging a brief glance with his partner. "Did you get the driver's name?" Grant asked. "Yes," Lynn said. "He said it himself, Dylan Hawthorne." The air in the small bay changed. Grant's pen stopped completely. Rivas uncrossed his arms, straightening slightly, his eyes sharpening with a new kind of focus. Grant let out a quiet breath through his nose and closed the notebook halfway, as if reconsidering whether it should be open at all. "Hawthorne," Grant repeated, the name landing heavier than the others. He looked at Lynn for the first time, really looked at her, his expression shifting into something that might have been concern or calculation. "Are you sure about that?" "Yes," Lynn said, her jaw tightening. "He said his father owned the city." Grant's mouth twisted into a thin line. "Look," he said, lowering his voice in a way that suggested he believed this was kindness. "Things get confusing when people are hurt. It was hot out there, busy street, sometimes pedestrians misjudge traffic. Maybe you stepped out without looking." Rivas nodded faintly, adding, "Jumping into the road can be considered reckless endangerment." Lynn stared at them, disbelief blooming into anger that made her chest ache. "He kicked me," she said. "I was protecting a dog." Grant shrugged, the gesture small but final. "Did anyone test his blood alcohol level? No? Then it's your word against his. And, well..." He let the sentence trail off, glancing at her vest, the cut fabric still lying on a tray nearby. Families like the Hawthorns don't usually end up in these kinds of reports. The implication settled over her like a weight. Lynn felt the familiar sensation of the ground shifting beneath her, the sense that truth alone was not going to be enough. She had lived her life on the wrong side of enough desks to recognize the pattern. She opened her mouth to protest, to insist, but before she could speak, a presence filled the space beside the curtain. Ethan Cross stepped into the bay with the same quiet authority he carried everywhere. He had cleaned the blood from his knuckles at a sink in the hallway, but the tension remained coiled in his shoulders, his posture relaxed only in the way a loaded weapon might be considered relaxed. He took in the scene in a glance, Lynn's pale face, the officer's body language, the closed notebook, and something hardened behind his eyes. "I'm the witness," he said calmly. Grant looked up, irritation flickering across his face. "Sir, this is a police matter." "It is," Ethan agreed. He reached into the back pocket of his jeans and produced a leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a military identification card. "And I'm Chief Petty Officer Ethan Cross, United States Navy. I observed the incident from start to finish." Revis's eyes flicked to the ID, then back to Ethan's face, lingering on the scar through his eyebrow, the unmistakable bearing of someone who did not bluff lightly. Grant hesitated, then gestured reluctantly. "Fine. What did you see?" Ethan spoke without raising his voice, his words precise, controlled. He described the red sports car accelerating toward the curb, the driver's impaired coordination, the slurred shouting, the kicks delivered to a woman already on the ground. He provided the license plate number from memory, reciting it cleanly, and named the time, the location, the angle of approach. Years of after-action reports had trained him to separate fact from emotion, to make every word count. "And," Ethan added, stepping closer, "I also observed 2 officers attempting to redirect a victim's statement before an investigation had begun." Grant bristled. "Watch your tone." Ethan's gaze did not waver. "Watch your process," he replied. "If this report disappears, or if it's altered to protect a donor's son, I will escalate it to the Judge Advocate General and request an external review. I will also request access to traffic and private security cameras in the area." Silence stretched between them. Rivas shifted again, unease creeping into his expression. Grant swallowed, his earlier confidence draining away. He reopened his notebook with a sharp snap. "We'll file it," he said curtly. "As stated." "Good," Ethan said. He stepped back, the confrontation over as quickly as it had begun, but the damage done. He knew men like Hawthorne would not let this go. He knew power rarely retreated when challenged. It circled, waited, and struck from another angle. Lynn watched the officers leave, her body sagging back against the pillow as the adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind exhaustion and pain. She looked at Ethan, uncertainty and gratitude warring in her expression. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan nodded once, his attention already shifting beyond the hospital walls, beyond the thin protection of paperwork. He glanced at the puppy, now asleep in the carrier, its chest rising and falling in shallow rhythm. "This isn't over," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "They'll come back." And in that moment, under the harsh lights of the emergency room, Lynn understood that the real danger had only just begun. Morning came without mercy. The sky over San Diego was cloudless, the sunlight sharp and white, pouring through the depot yard like an interrogation lamp. Lynn Pham arrived early, as she always did, her body stiff from the night on the hospital cot, ribs wrapped tight beneath her uniform. Every breath reminded her of the kick, but pain was something she knew how to hide. What unsettled her more was the quiet. The depot, usually alive with engines, shouts, and the metallic scrape of carts, seemed subdued, as if the place itself were holding its breath. Her supervisor, Mark Alvarez, called her name before she even reached her cart. Mark was a short, heavy-set man in his late 50s, with graying hair plastered flat against his scalp and a mustache yellowed slightly by years of coffee and stress. He avoided conflict by instinct, shoulders always hunched, eyes rarely meeting those of the people he managed. Today his hands shook as he gestured her into his small office, a glass-walled box that offered the illusion of transparency without any of its protection. He did not ask her to sit. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk toward her. The letterhead bore a logo Lynn recognized instantly, Hawthorne Group, embossed in dark red ink that looked disturbingly like dried blood. "I'm sorry," Mark said, voice barely above a whisper. "This came from downtown. They say you caused a public disturbance, endangered traffic, damaged private property. He swallowed. They're terminating your contract, effective immediately. Lynn stared at the paper. The words blurred. I was assaulted, she said quietly. I was doing my job. Mark nodded, his gaze fixed on the desk. I know, but this name. He tapped the letterhead with one trembling finger. You don't fight people like this. Take your final check and go home before it gets worse. The metal gate clanged shut behind her minutes later, the sound echoing like a verdict. Lynn stood on the sidewalk with her cardboard box of belongings, gloves, a water bottle, a spare shirt, feeling as though the city had turned its back all at once. Anger burned beneath her ribs, but fear crept in around the edges, cold and insistent. Without the job, the room, the fragile balance she had built, everything began to tilt. Her apartment building sat on the edge of a neglected block, a converted warehouse with peeling paint and flickering lights. The hallway smelled of damp concrete and old cooking oil. As Lynn approached her door, something felt wrong. The lock hung crooked, metal scratched and bent. The frame splintered where a screwdriver or crowbar had forced its way in. Her heart slammed into her throat. She pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the small room was chaos. Drawers pulled out, clothes scattered, her mattress slashed in two long, angry cuts. The cheap lamp lay shattered on the floor. Under the bed, she saw movement, a pair of dark eyes shining from the shadows. The puppy crawled deeper under the frame, shaking so hard its claws clicked against the tile. Lynn sank to her knees, the weight of it all crashing down at once. Jobless, targeted, no lock strong enough to keep the world out. She pressed her forehead to the floor and let herself cry, the sobs tearing out of her chest despite her effort to stay silent. She did not hear the footsteps in the hall. Ethan Cross paused in the doorway, taking in the scene with a soldier's efficiency. The broken lock, the torn mattress, the dog's position under the bed. He cataloged each detail without emotion, but something dark settled in his gut. He had seen this tactic before, in villages overseas, in neighborhoods closer to home. Intimidation, escalation. He closed the door behind him quietly. Lynn looked up, startled, then relief flooded her face so fast it left her dizzy. They broke in, she said, as if the words might explain everything. Ethan nodded once. He set his backpack down and pulled out tools, screwdriver, drill, a small pouch of heavy-duty screws. He did not ask permission. He went to work. His movements were calm, precise, the same discipline that guided him through hostile terrain, now focused on a cheap apartment door. He replaced the lock with a reinforced deadbolt, drove long screws deep into the frame, tested the hinges with controlled force. He checked the windows, adjusted the latch, ensured the fire escape was clear. Rex sat just inside the door, ears forward, eyes tracking every sound from the hallway. The dog's posture was relaxed but ready, his presence a silent promise. Lynn watched from the bed, exhaustion washing over her. When Ethan finished, she broke again, tears spilling freely. I lost my job, she whispered. They're everywhere. Ethan straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. His face remained composed, but his voice softened. You didn't do anything wrong, he said. This is how they operate. They make you feel small so you'll disappear. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls orange, a knock sounded on the reinforced door. Not hesitant, confident. 3 sharp taps. The man who stood in the hallway looked like money personified. Victor Hale, mid-40s, tall and lean, silver hair combed back neatly, jaw clean-shaven, skin pale and flawless. His suit fit perfectly, the fabric smooth and dark, his leather shoes polished to a mirror shine. His smile was practiced, charming without warmth, eyes pale blue and assessing, like a predator evaluating distance. I'm here to resolve a misunderstanding, he said smoothly, stepping inside when Lynn moved aside. He placed a leather briefcase on the table, opened it, and slid out a contract and a thick envelope. Sign this. Acknowledgement of fault, agreement of silence. He nudged the envelope forward. Cash. Enough to buy security, enough to buy compliance. Lynn's hands trembled as she picked it up. For a moment, she imagined rent paid, food stocked, fear quieted. Then she thought of the puppy under her bed. The kick. The lies. Her jaw set. She opened the envelope and let the money spill onto the floor. I don't sell the truth, she said. Victor's smile vanished. "You're making a mistake," he hissed. From the corner of the room, Ethan stepped forward, his presence filling the space like a closing door. She said no. Victor backed away, eyes narrowing. "This isn't over." Ethan met his gaze without blinking. Good. Ethan Cross did not believe in chaos as a solution. Chaos was what happened when planning failed, when emotion overruled discipline. He had learned that lesson the hard way years earlier, during a night operation that ended with a body bag and a name he still carried silently. What he believed in now was pressure applied with precision, truth used as leverage, and violence only as a last, controlled resort. After Victor Hale left Lynn's apartment with his threats hanging in the air like poison, Ethan did not chase him. He watched from the window until the lawyer's polished shoes disappeared down the stairs. Then he turned inward, already building a map in his mind. He borrowed Lynn's small kitchen table and set his laptop down, posture straight, shoulders squared, the way he had once sat in briefing rooms lit by red lamps in anticipation. Rex lay at his feet, alert but calm, amber eyes following every movement of Ethan's hands. The dog was 5 years old, his muzzle beginning to show the faintest dusting of gray, muscles still tight and responsive beneath his coat. He had learned patience in places where impatience got men killed. The puppy, still nameless, slept curled inside a cardboard box, padded with a towel, chest rising and falling in shallow, trusting rhythm. Lynn watched them both from the bed, arms wrapped around herself, trying to make sense of how her small life had collided with something so vast. Ethan reached out to a contact he had not spoken to in over a year. The call went through on the second ring. Elias Thorne answered with a voice like gravel dragged across steel. Elias had once been naval intelligence, a man with narrow shoulders, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that never quite stopped moving. He was in his early 40s now, hair cropped close to his scalp, beard trimmed short and precise. The kind of man who lived comfortably in shadows and spoke rarely without purpose. Years of digging through classified messes had carved cynicism deep into him, but they had not dulled his loyalty to the few people he trusted. "Talk," Elias said. "I need a trace," Ethan replied. "Hawthorne, shipping, containers moving through a private yard near the south docks." There was a pause, the faint sound of keys clicking. "You poking a bear, Ethan?" The bear poked first. Another pause, longer this time. "You always did have timing issues." Elias exhaled slowly. "Yeah, there's something there. Shell companies, fake manifests, money washing through maritime logistics. Kid's sloppy. Thinks his name protects him." "It doesn't," Ethan said. Elias gave a short, humorless laugh. "No, it really doesn't." Within hours, Ethan had what he needed. Not proof enough for a courtroom yet, but enough to frighten a man who had never faced consequences. He crafted the next step carefully. Rumors were weapons, if you knew where to aim them. Through channels Elias still monitored, private group chats, backroom conversations at clubs and marinas, Ethan let it be known that Lynn Pham possessed copies of video footage from the marina incident, along with transaction records linking Dylan Hawthorne to illegal shipments. He added a single detail, sharpened to cut where it hurt most. The footage allegedly showed Dylan using cocaine inside the car. Ethan knew men like Dylan. They did not fear the law. They feared exposure, to fathers, to investors, to the fragile structures that held their privilege upright. The bait worked. The message came just after sunset the following day. A burner number, short, aggressive, meet, midnight, old container yard by Pier 9, bring everything, come alone. Ethan read it once, then deleted it. He turned to Lynn, who sat rigid on the edge of the bed, her dark hair pulled back, his face pale but resolute. "We're going to end this tonight," he said. "You won't be near them, you'll be above them." The container yard was a dead place after dark. Stacks of rusting metal boxes rose like tombstones under a sliver of moon, the air heavy with the smell of oil, salt, and old rain. Wind moved through the corridors between containers, carrying distant echoes of the city without any of its warmth. Ethan arrived early, parking his truck a mile away and approaching on foot. He wore dark clothes that broke up his outline, his movements economical and soundless. Years of combat had taught him to read terrain the way others read faces. He saw sightlines, choke points, escape routes. He placed Lynn inside a raised control booth overlooking the yard, a narrow metal structure with cracked windows and a ladder that rattled faintly when climbed. Inside, she sat on the floor with her back to the wall, knees pulled up, arms wrapped around the puppy, whose ears twitched at every sound. Lynn was small, barely over 5 feet tall, her strength not physical, but stubborn and enduring. Her skin bore the faint yellowing of healing bruises. Her eyes, however, were clear, fixed on Ethan with trust edged by fear. "You stay here," Ethan said, handing her a heavy flashlight and a small radio. "If anyone comes near the ladder, you tell me. Otherwise, you don't move." Rex sat beside her, tail curled neatly around his paws, the picture of disciplined calm. He had been trained to protect, but more importantly, to wait. Down below, Ethan finished preparing the yard. He located the breaker box feeding the floodlights and wired a manual override. He placed portable strobe lights salvaged from abandoned equipment at key intersections between containers. He cracked open fire extinguishers, positioning them where a single strike would flood the air with white blindness. None of it was lethal. All of it was disorienting. Midnight came with the crunch of tires on gravel. Dylan Hawthorne arrived in a red sports car that looked obscene against the rusted backdrop. He stepped out wearing a leather jacket and designer jeans, his blonde hair disheveled, eyes darting. He was not alone. 2 familiar shapes followed, his club friends, pale and nervous. And behind them came 3 men who did not belong to Dylan's world. Dock workers, hired muscle. Thick-necked, scarred, faces set in expressions of practiced menace. One of them, bald with a beard like steel wool and arms tattooed with faded ink, carried a tire iron loosely at his side. He moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to breaking things. "Come out!" Dylan shouted, his voice echoing. "You want the money? Bring the data." Ethan watched from the shadows, breathing slow and deep. 6 hostiles, 1 firearm likely concealed. He waited until they spread out, until their attention focused outward instead of inward. Then he killed the lights. Darkness swallowed the yard. At the same moment, the strobes erupted, flashing harsh white pulses that destroyed depth perception. The fire extinguishers burst, coughing thick clouds into the narrow lanes. Horns wired to batteries screamed from different directions, sound bouncing off steel until it was impossible to tell where anything came from. Panic followed instantly. Ethan moved. He took the first man from behind, a precise sweep that dumped him onto concrete, breath gone in a wheeze. A lock followed, pressure applied just enough to induce unconsciousness. Zip ties clicked tight. The second fell to a knee strike and wrist lock, bones twisting with a sharp cry before going limp. The third charged blindly and met a shoulder that redirected his momentum straight into a container wall. Ethan used gravity, leverage, nothing wasted. Above, Lynn watched through the cracked glass, heart pounding. She saw shapes moving, heard shouting swallowed by noise. She spotted one figure peeling away toward the ladder, a wrench raised, eyes wild. She did not hesitate. She triggered the flashlight, a focused beam slamming into the man's face. He screamed, dropping the tool, hands flying to his eyes. Ethan saw the signal and acted. Within seconds, the hired men were down, bound, groaning. Silence fell as abruptly as it had broken. Dylan stood alone, chest heaving, terror finally breaking through the arrogance. He fumbled at his waistband and produced a small revolver, hand shaking. "I'll kill you!" he screamed, tears streaking his face. "You don't win! My father wins!" Ethan froze, distance misjudged. He could not close in time. Rex did. The Malinois exploded from beneath a container, a blur of muscle and instinct. He launched himself upward, jaws clamping onto Dylan's wrist with surgical precision. The gun clattered to the ground. Dylan collapsed, screaming. Rex released immediately at Ethan's command and stood over him, growling low, body rigid with controlled threat. Ethan kicked the weapon away and drove Dylan face first onto the concrete, zip ties cinching tight. The fight drained out of the young man, leaving only sobbing and disbelief. Sirens cut through the night, this time sharper, closer. Federal vehicles rolled into the yard, lights washing steel red and blue. Ethan stepped back, hands visible, calm restored. It was over. Peace did not arrive with trumpets or applause. It came quietly, on legal paper and early morning news alerts, in sealed indictments and careful language that avoided admitting how close everything had come to breaking completely. The case spread outward like ink in water, touching names and offices that had believed themselves immune. Dylan Hawthorne was charged with multiple felonies tied to money laundering and illegal shipping, his once polished image collapsing under surveillance records, financial trails, and testimony that could no longer be buried. The Hawthorne Group issued statements written by committees and lawyers, all remorse without responsibility, while internal investigations reached into the police department, lifting badges from men who had mistaken influence for law. The city learned, slowly and reluctantly, that power left fingerprints everywhere. Lynn Pham watched most of it unfold from a small kitchen table that had become her command center. She was still slight, still carried herself with a careful economy of motion born from years of making do. But something fundamental had shifted. The bruises on her ribs faded from yellow to nothing, leaving only memory, and her eyes, dark, observant, once guarded, held a steadier light. She had been cleared officially, her termination reversed on paper, with apologies that felt heavier than the insults that had preceded them. She declined the offer to return. Some doors, once closed hard enough, did not need reopening. The settlement arrived without ceremony. A number printed cleanly at the bottom of a document that represented more money than Lynn had ever imagined having at one time. Friends, few but earnest, suggested she buy something permanent, something safe, a condo, a car, a future built of walls and locks. Lynn listened, nodded, thanked them. Then she did something else. She rented a narrow storefront 2 blocks from a neighborhood park where people walked their dogs in the mornings. The sign she hung above the door was simple, hand-painted at first. Rex and Hope. Rescue and Care. Inside, the space smelled of clean wood and lavender soap. The floors were scuffed intentionally, chosen for durability rather than shine. Shelves held food, leashes, blankets. A bulletin board listed free training hours and job openings for people who needed a second chance as much as the animals did. Lynn worked with sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back, hands always busy. She spoke softly to frightened dogs and firmly to those who needed structure, her patience deep and practiced. The shop became a place where people lingered, where stories were shared without judgment. The puppy grew quickly. Lynn named him Nova for the way something small had exploded into her life and changed everything. Nova's coat deepened into rich fawn and black, his frame lengthening, muscles knitting themselves into the promise of strength. By 8 months, he had outgrown his clumsiness, moving with the springy confidence of a dog who knew the world could be dangerous but was no longer afraid of it. His ears stood tall now, his tail wagged freely, and he greeted customers with careful enthusiasm, sitting when asked, eyes bright. Children loved him. Adults smiled without realizing it. He became the shop's quiet symbol, the living proof that survival could turn into joy. Rex watched it all with calm approval. At 5, going on 6, his pace slowed just enough to reveal his age, a faint silver dusting his muzzle, but his posture remained impeccable. He lay near the door during business hours, head resting on his paws, eyes tracking movement with effortless vigilance. To strangers, he was gentle, dignified. To Lynn, he was constant. To Ethan, when Ethan was there, he was still a partner, still a shadow that matched his stride. Ethan Cross did not linger in the spotlight. He gave his statements, met with federal agents whose suits were sharper than their questions, and declined interviews with a practiced neutrality. His role had been documented, commended quietly, then set aside. That was how he preferred it. He spent the weeks after the arrests helping Lynn finish the shop, mounting shelves, fixing a stubborn hinge, building a low ramp so older dogs could enter easily. He moved through the space with the same disciplined ease he brought to everything, but there was a gentleness to his hands that surprised people who knew only the outline of his work. He was 33, broad and solid, his body marked by service and restraint. His dark hair had grown just long enough to curl at the edges, his jaw rough with stubble. He shaved less often now. The scar through his eyebrow remained a pale line, but the deeper marks, the nights that had taught him silence, the missions that had ended without closure, were carried in the way he watched doorways, the way he stood so he could see exits. War had not made him cruel, it had made him precise. And meeting Lynn, watching her choose integrity when fear would have been easier, had shifted something in him that no debrief ever had. They did not speak of love, not yet. They spoke of schedules and supplies, of which dogs needed patience and which needed rules. They shared meals on the shop's back steps at dusk, the air cooling, Nova stretched between them, Rex alert but relaxed. There was comfort in the quiet. There was respect. That felt like enough. The call came on a clear morning. Ethan stood in the shop doorway when his phone vibrated. the sound small but decisive. He read the message once, then again. Orders were orders. His leave was over. The unit needed him. The world, it seemed, did not pause simply because one corner of it had found balance. He waited until closing to tell Lynn. She was brushing Nova, the dog's tail thumping gently against the floor, her expression focused and calm. When she looked up, she read the truth in Ethan's face before he spoke. There was sadness there, yes, but also certainty. This was who he was. This was the line he walked. "I have to go back," he said. Lynn nodded. She had always known this moment would come. Her throat tightened, but her voice held. "I know." They walked together to the small park down the street, Rex moving between them, the city softened by late afternoon light. Ethan stopped beneath a jacaranda tree and reached beneath his shirt, drawing out a thin chain. 2 metal dog tags slid into his palm, worn smooth at the edges. He placed them into Lynn's hand and closed her fingers around them. "Hold on to these," he said quietly. "I'll come back for them." Lynn looked down at the tags, then up at him. Her eyes shone, not with tears but with something steadier. "We'll be here," she said. "All of us." At the airport, the noise swallowed them. Announcements echoed, footsteps rushed past, the world moving forward as it always did. Ethan wore his uniform again, crisp and familiar, the weight of duty settling back onto his shoulders. He knelt once to scratch Rex behind the ears, resting his forehead briefly against the dog's. "Guard the door," he murmured. Rex's tail gave a single, solemn wag. Ethan straightened, kissed Lynn's forehead, gentle, lingering, then turned and walked through security without looking back. Soldiers did not look back. They carried what mattered forward. Months passed. The shop flourished. People found work and purpose. Dogs found homes. Nova grew into his strength, a young guardian who watched the street from the window with bright intelligence. Lynn learned the rhythm of ownership, the quiet pride of building something that mattered. At night, when the city settled, she held the dog tags and felt the steady weight of a promise. Peace, she learned, did not mean the absence of danger. It meant the presence of choice. It meant knowing what you stood for when fear knocked at the door, and answering anyway. And somewhere beyond the horizon, Ethan carried that knowledge with him too, a quiet certainty that when the noise fell away again, there would be a place called Rex and Hope, a woman who did not sell the truth, and a door guarded by loyalty and light. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with wings or thunder. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through a choice made in fear, a hand extended when it would be easier to walk away, or a soul that refuses to sell the truth no matter the price. What happened to Lynn, Ethan, Rex, and Nova was not magic in the fairy tale sense. It was the miracle of courage meeting compassion at the exact moment it was needed. In everyday life, we pass crossroads like this more often than we realize, a moment where we can stay silent or speak up, walk past or step in, protect ourselves, or protect what is right. Most days the world won't applaud these choices, but they matter. They shape who we become, and sometimes they change the course of another life forever. If this story reminded you that goodness still exists, that strength can be gentle, and that even one brave decision can light a path through darkness, please share it with someone who might need that reminder today. Leave a comment and tell us, what would you have done in Lynn's place? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories of courage, justice, and hope. May God bless you and keep you safe. May He grant you the courage of a protector, the heart of a servant, and the wisdom to choose what is right even when it is hard. And may His protection surround you and your loved ones, today and always. Amen.